Welcome to Transmissions from Yonder Shore, a podcast for the Mythic Seeker at the Liminal Edge. Hello everyone, welcome to this Forest Walks episode of the From Yonder Shore Podcast. I am no longer walking up on my little sacred mountain that I found back in January, Chihuahua. At least that's the name that was sort of whispered to me the first time I went up this way and tuned into the land. I don't know exactly where it is. It's in Harriman State Park in New York. So Lenape land. Forget the name of the lakes that it's positioned at. I know how to get here. I know how to get back from here. And that's all that really matters. I was laughing because I'm trying to get a sample of this. I was going to bring my rattle along. I only brought my flute and my little tongue drum. But there's all these, off the mountain, off those little outcropping of rock that I'm sitting at, there's a bunch of grass and plants growing behind me in this little valley. And there's grasshoppers just all over the place. And they're making this wonderful little rattling sound. Not sure if we'll be able to pick it up here. I'll try to get a sample of it and include it in here. But it's a wonderful accompaniment. And just as I start recording, I have Hawk flying over me, flying around. So Hawk says hello. And thank you for tuning in. It's wonderful to be here on another gorgeous Ish day. It's ironic that I've been called to record most of these on parts of my Ish day ceremonies. Out into the woodlands, out into my sacred spots, out into tuning into the magic of the land and giving thanks and saying some prayers and going with the flow of synchronicity and whatever is called. And this week was filled with them. Again, we have another geomagnetic storm happening, underway, whether we saw auroras or not, doesn't really matter. But they always bring with them this magic of synchronicity, and don't know whether it's tuning into our bioelectric field. There are some theories that they evolve viruses and, can mutate simple-celled organisms. Large enough storms, there are totally, you can find them in the archaeological and paleontological record. You find them evidence within tree rings. A wonderful scientist, and the Mayaki events are named after her, was able to trace sort of these large solar events that are in mythic folklore around Japan and Finland and all over the place, and find through carbon-14 datings, through looking at the radiation spikes within trees, evidence of these geomagnetic phenomenon happening simultaneously, and I find that remarkable. Not only because it kind of brings a myth alive and history into new context. Also shows just how powerful and how influenced and how synergetic we are with the sun, with our planet. And there's no way that these events don't have a effect on our consciousness and also our biological organism. Anyway, it's always cool and very synchronistic to be here with you all again under those circumstances. Chihuahua is a special place. I want to see if it's actually maybe in a word in a Lenape language or have some sort of etymological roots to the region. And it reminded me very similarly to the conversations I was blessed to record this week with Eric Myers, a wonderful transpersonal astrologer and author, one of my favorite astrology authors out there, Nat Gersberger, who's a terrific visual artist and also tarot curator. Her decks are really fantastic. The Radiant Wilds has a beautiful transmission. And then my dear friend Manu, a terrific playwright and filmmaker and screenwriter. And similar themes, or the overarching theme of the week, maybe it's fitting for Gemini season. And, we have Uranus and Gemini and what have you, is this transmission of messages, the birth of ideas, the impulse an almost possession to create. And the idea that these messages, like Chiwahe, the name of where I'm at, sort of comes to you. You listen, it sounds like it comes from within, but there's really, a reflection of without. And that's a big theme of these episodes. I'll put them in the show notes as well so you can reflect back on them. Decided to put them all out around the same time just because thematically they weave together so beautifully, and also and sort of introduce my non-linear methods with these things and this work, and not following any sort of rhyme or reason other than what I feel called to do, whether it's correct in some sort of eyes or not. But the overarching themes, and I apologize, you're probably going to get a little plane, small plane is going to be is approaching. It's very hard to escape or leave behind our Western world or technological world, and escape into silence and even seeing darkness and the night sky. Very difficult, and that's okay. We're going to embrace that today. Sometimes I'm going to have to go deeper into the forest, further away from so-called civilization to get some true silence and embracing that, the quiet of the world and the not silence, right? All the beautiful songs and noises of like these crickets here of the natural world, and even just the rustling of the wind through the treetops. It's rather beautiful and eases our nervous system and just helps us tune in to, our biological inheritance. So the point was, weaving back to and fro, we brought up Philip K. Dick quite a bit. Valis is a terrific novel of his, and his notion of this vast acting living intelligence system, Valis, that these satellites, this consciousness, this intelligence that is speaking to us, speaking to the world, that is just broadcasting transmissions and pollinating ideas, scattering to and fro for anyone kind of receptive enough to hear them and pick up on them and draw inspiration and create from them. And it's very similar to the way mushrooms work. I've been having a crash course on just watching growth and maturation and the growing cycle of them and plants in general. How, indiscriminately they cast a wide net and they look for wherever they can, take root and blossom. And it's very similar with ideas. I know Eric and I talked about it and briefly mentioned how a lot of creatives, writers and stuff will be laboring over something and then only to find that, oh wow, another story, another book, another film, another song comes out that is very similar thematically, right? We all have our unique lens or our way of translating things, like the language of the mind essay and the heart mind behind our expression. But they're not, we can't say that they are anything truly unique except for our independent and individualistic filters. But so often we find that, up to a point like where it's like, wow, this is what's just completely ripped off or for my stuff, and you can develop conspiracies around that, like, oh gosh, I got plagiarized or hacked, and I find that very amusing. Not to say that doesn't happen, and that's always a cause for alarm and concern, rightfully so. But my point would be the indiscriminate nature of these ideas wishing to be born, these creations wishing to be born, and finding the right conduit, the right channel, the fertile ground to blossom that idea into a transmission, a work of art, a book, a novel, a song, a painting, a company, anything really doesn't come from the individual, doesn't come from, that ego base of reality. It's very much independent of that and more of a tuning in and a listening. And this is something Manu and I talked about quite often. Hope you listen to that episode because there's so much wisdom in there. Anytime we gather over the years, it's always a beautiful meeting of the minds, and we are left invigorated, inspired to dive into our projects and our collaborations. And a very similar theme and reinvigoration came out with our reconnecting with Nat Gersberger, who I had met through Manu. We all met each other around the same time, almost good God, almost 7 years ago at this point. So it was very funny how both of them kind of re-emerged into my life in this beautiful way at the same time. Hey, Hawk. Hawk's back around. Her dialogue and her wisdom and this beauty from silence and this the liminal spaces that her work, her art, and her life kind of draws from, whether it's her pilgrimages to the desert, speaks to that internal truth where wherever we're having this source of inspiration, whether it's in our dreams or in the silence, going off with ourselves and listening, it's not an emergence from that level of consciousness. Consciousness comes in from listening to it and acknowledging and letting something sort of pass through. So much like a solar flare, right? So like when we have an electromagnetic spike or electricity spike, you have to shut off the grid and let that current pass through so it doesn't fry everything out. And it's a very similar way of how these transmissions are beamed to us, whatever that may be. How, why, those things don't matter. Once again, I feel like I say that over and over again. What's important is the listening. And it's up to us to really decide whether we're going to follow those impulses, the Uranian impulses that Eric and I discuss, and seize those moments and to do the work of midwifing them into being, into creation. Now, one of the things I wanted to discuss with you today, and this is something that's also coming up, and it's very similar to these conversations about being honest about the lack of not agency, but a lack of individuality or independence or ego attached to creation, and the honesty of and you hear this in so many different authors. David Lynch has mentioned this about just, in the whole element of transcendental meditation and dream states, how ideas are just birthed. There's this well at hand that we can swim in whenever we wish. We can dip our ladle in, rejuvenate our creativity, and it's always there. It's just a matter of tuning into it and listening. It's something Manu and I discussed as well in that episode quite a bit, so worth checking out. But another parallel was I was writing a new essay, and the essay, is nothing new under the sun. Maybe a reminder, a new translation or transmission of similar thoughts and ideas that have been contemplated probably for as long as humans have been humans. All the great questions. And it ties together this piece that I've been working on about the Aquarian age, the Aquarius-Leo axis, Pluto in Aquarius, and it's the end of the guru that is becoming fused with this essay. That's really about the nuance of perception, the real surrendering of ego to let ideas come, but also the plethora of voices, the plethora of perspective, and the diverse kind of reality we are at hand. And hence why I wanted to I am combining this with the End of the Guru essay, is because that is a very Aquarian principle. So Aquarius is that collective on the shadow of the hive mind. No part is separate. It's all part of the whole. And I'm laughing because I was reminded of a really funny video synchronistically that my partner shared with me, and it was on the concept of, it's like a little comedy video on the concept of a grain of sand in someone's fish tank and being interviewed, and an interviewer are human, and he's asking, well, why do you consider yourself, you're a being, but why do you don't consider yourself a being that's a part of humanity, right? Why do we latch to this independence and separation of who we are as a species? And it's very thematic to everything that was coming through this week and being discussed and rehashed and tuning in through inspiration and synchronicity. So I'm going to riff on that a little bit more, not just in essay form, but something to, it's an ongoing discussion. This has been talked over so much by astrologers about the Pluto going into Aquarius and really the start of the Aquarian age. Maybe that's not talked about too much, AI and Pluto and Aquarius, very much so, which I may not get to today. But the tentative starting point around an age is always suspect because there's so many variety of calculations and calendar systems that it's really hard to pinpoint where exactly who we are. And when we're dealing with long-term changes and big shifts of time, there's this overlap that happens. Like an approaching aspect, you feel that new energy. You feel the aspect greater than when it's conjoined. So like we have been feeling the birth of the Aquarian age longer than, say, we've been in the Aquarian age. And, but you can make the case, especially if you just examine the last several years, especially since Pluto wrapped up its journey through Capricorn and has gone into Aquarius and so fully established in Aquarius, that we are in this Aquarian age. Is one of the big things that happens is that you always have to take the medicine of Aquarius is in its polarity Leo, and just as the same, the medicine for Leo is in its polarity Aquarius. And with Pluto being in Aquarius, even though it's bringing up the collective shadow, as it always does, being a transpersonal planet, a collective planet, it does speak to the collective at large, but also the individuals that make up the collective. The opposition gets hit pretty strongly. Obviously, all the squares and what have you too, but back on the tethered of the polarities and being medicine for each other and being intimately linked, what we see is that as the collective is becoming more and more important, as the variety and number of teachers called to put out their voice to unique wisdom accelerates, as technology continues to make the spreading of messages and the transmission of thought even more accessible, we see an acceleration of the collective, of the human level, the humanitarian level, the societal level. And that will be going through a purgative process, as it always does, but even more so with Pluto and Aquarius, and Pluto being that alchemizing force, that transformative power, the energy that pulls from the soil and up to the roots for something to blossom. What's up? That's actually a vulture this time. Very funny talking about Pluto. One of the beautiful symbols of Scorpio and Virgo as well for the Plutonic nature. You can check out the purification rites of the heart piece for the connection between the sacred rites of Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio to get what I'm talking about there. So we got this Plutonic force, this transformative force that brings energy up from the dark, brings the unconscious to the light of consciousness through pain, through transformation, through growth, through struggle, through realization, right? Scorpio is that threefold sign that has the ability to really go into the depths, into the dark, into the shadow, and bring up this wisdom of truth that just rejuvenates and regenerates whatever sector it's kind of hitting. So with Pluto being Aquarius, it's doing that process for humanity, for, on us, whichever level we're talking about, whether it's economic divides, repression, the still irritatingly patriarchal kind of mindset that is limiting and damaging to the feminine, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I would like to say that the other side of it, we're going to be wiser, and we're going to have a more humanitarian, universal sort of perspective where, while life is sort of considered sacred, considered important, maybe, the economic divide would kind of lessen. We realize that, hey, we got to really tend to the whole here. The individual doesn't matter if the whole is gone. And, yeah. So those are just on the little societal levels. But the exasperation, what's been coming out, especially early on and leading up to the shift of Pluto and Aquarius, is that we have been over-identifying, and this is not a judgment, labels, seeking to define who we uniquely are as these magical beings, which is true. Amongst the collective, amongst all the noise, all the oversaturation, how do we stand out? Or me just being a human being, or me, being whatever sexual orientation is limiting for whoever I am, right? So we kind of label things, to stand out, to separate, to celebrate who we are. It's beautiful, but at the same time, it heightens the ego separation of us, of the Leo element of our charts, of our being, of life, that separates from the humanitarian, from the collective, from that, I am a human being, and that's one of those labels that's sort of a wider, almost like the most objective we can kind of get this time around, whatever version or being we are as human beings. Like, that's pretty much we can stretch that like that. We're human beings, not just on Earth, but in the Milky Way. So we can extend it only so far. We reach a point where the laws of our language, the laws of our reality, the firmament, the Saturnian part of Aquarius creates these boundaries and these structures, the laws of gravity, so to speak. So these are the Saturnian boundaries of the firmament of the Logos, these constructed thought worlds of our existence. Now, the Uranian aspect of Aquarius is about shattering those boundaries through like lightning strike inspiration. And it, sets fire and burns the walls down so they can be expanded and rebuilt. Or they introduce a new law. We discover a new law, that expands our understanding of reality. You can see that with just how prevalent the notion of multiverses and quantum models have became in culture. They're all in the films and all the narratives, and people are having fun with them because it speaks to a truth that we know, right? This is never like learning something new. This is a remembering of a way that we have always known. So just this time around, our translation and our transmission of these things are through a scientific lens, through a scientific language, rather than, you can take that whichever way. So more and more, as we enter this age of Aquarius, as we embrace this age of Aquarius, we're confronted with that polarity of who am I amongst the collective? What kind of drop am I amongst the sea? Where do I begin and others kind of end, type of thing? And it's fascinating. So there'll be more on that. Definitely check out those essays. Depending on when this is released, they may be up on the site, or they may be kind of in waiting for publication with a certain press. I'd love to share more about those opportunities, those events. But in the meantime, you can check out the other From Yonder Shore episodes. I have these wonderful guest episodes and conversations, mini reflections. You can find the essays up on FromYonderShore.com. Under the Hermit's Lantern has the Logos blog, the essays, and access to the podcasts and all those things. And feel free to sign up for the newsletter for a little occasional inbox updates. Very occasionally. Promise you that. And as always, reading opportunities are available. My schedule gets pretty packed up for live readings. A lot better at recorded readings in terms of turnaround and accessibility. So feel free to check that out there. You can go to FromYonderShore.com, look at under the pathways and offerings. You can check out the available astrology readings and oracle readings with whether this is tarot or the Elder Futhark, the rune castings. And so enjoy your day wherever you are. Hopefully you are getting to dip into nature a bit, visit a very special sacred place for yourself, give a little thanks, and have a lovely week, month, year, day, decade. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Yonder Shore Podcast. Sign up, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next transmission at www.FromYonderShore.com.